Dominic Cardy, Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development. Le porte-parole aujourd'hui sera le ministre de l'Éducation et du Développement de la Petite Enfance, Dominic Cardy. Following the minister's statement, he will be available to answer questions along with the Assistant Deputy Minister of Corporate Services for the department, Robert Penny, who will assist with technical and logistical questions. Après son discours, le ministre sera disponible pour répondre aux questions en collaboration avec le sous-ministre adjoint des services généraux du ministère, Robert Penny, pour répondre aux questions techniques et logistiques. Minister Cardy?
Thanks so much, Danielle. Thanks everyone for being here today. Start off with it. Today is International Education Day. And the theme for this year's International Education Day is changing course and transforming education, something that I know all of the folks who work throughout our education system have been working incredibly hard to try and turn into a reality through this difficult and ongoing battle against COVID-19 and its assorted variants. So I know that families, students, teachers, the whole province is anxiously waiting a return to in-person learning for our students. Et nous savons que l'apprentissage à distance n'est pas une situation idéale pour plusieurs de nos élèves et les familles, mais cela était nécessaire pour ralentir la transmission d'Omicron et de permettre à notre système de santé de demeurer fonctionnel. Durant cette mesure, nous avons également profité de l'occasion pour que le personnel des écoles obtienne une 3e dose de vaccin. Pour l'instant, nous espérons le retour à l'apprentissage en personne lundi prochain, le 31 janvier, mais cela dépendra des derniers conseils et des décisions de la santé publique plus tard dans la semaine. Mais nous dépendons de la coopération des New-Brunswickois pour pouvoir y arriver. Nous avons besoin que chacun joue son rôle et respecte les directives de la santé publique afin que nos élèves puissent reprendre l'apprentissage en personne la semaine prochaine. So take this moment to repeat my thanks for the teachers who have been doing their best to struggle through with all the challenges that online learning presents, those teachers who've been working with the students, small in number, but great in need, who've been in our schools, thank you for that, and of course our early childhood educators, who have always been there throughout this pandemic for the students and young people of our province. And parents as well. I recognize that changes to education throw your lives upside down, and I don't for a moment underestimate the impact on your lives. And again, I only say that we are only doing this as part of our collective effort to push back against a disease that right now is threatening our hospital system. We're working with the trade unions on mobility agreements to allow the movement of staff, both in the K-12 sector and into the early childhood education sector. We hope to be able to provide details on that front in the days to come. Also been discussions around working on foreign credential recognition, something that's happened in a couple of other provinces, to allow folks with teachers' credentials to be able to step in and help. But of course, these have to go through the channels to make sure that we have the right folks in front of New Brunswick's kids. As the Premier mentioned last week, we've been working closely with Public Health to open up spaces at 7 early learning and childcare facilities to support the redeployment of nurses at several hospitals across the province. This program will keep spaces open for nurses who need to travel to provide greater support to hospitals impacted by COVID-19 outbreaks. Since we announced the move to home learning following the winter break, staff at the department, in the districts, and schools have all been working diligently to ensure that we are taking every precaution for when students return to class. This included work to make sure that some of our most vulnerable and at-risk students were able to continue learning in person over the past few weeks, as I've mentioned. Before the winter break began, it seems like 3,000 years ago, we did introduce some changes that would come into effect when students returned. Those were all included in our winter plan, and they're available online if anyone's interested. And those included classroom groupings, or bubbles as we come to know them, for students in kindergarten to grade 8, universal indoor masking except when eating or drinking for all students and staff at all grade levels, outdoor masking for high school students. At level 2, in the 3-level phases that we have right now for handling restrictions based on COVID, and of course we hope to move from the level 3 we're currently in to level 2 as soon as possible, hopefully on the 31st. But at level 2, K-8 students will not be required to wear masks outdoors if they're within their bubbles. However, masking outdoors will be required for all students at level 3 if we end up in a return to level 3 with schools open for in-person learning. We've limited the use of wind instruments and singing, And finally, introduce vaccination requirements for those 12 and older for extracurricular activities, sports, and clubs. So in addition to these plans, we've also secured quality face masks for teachers. Those masks have been graded as either KN95s or higher. They don't require special fitting, and we're hopeful this will help to add yet another layer of protection for our students and staff. As per public health guidance, we recommend that students wear a well-fitted 3-layer mask or higher quality as they desire. Proper mask use is going to be enforced. Masks must cover the nose and mouth at all times. We have been working on plans to redeploy teachers and educators throughout our system in the event of staff shortages caused by absences caused by illness due to COVID-19, and of course at this time of year, other illnesses that often come into play, their effect only compounded by the pandemic. Our goal is to have more teaching staff available so that students and families experience fewer disruptions to in-person learning for the rest of this school year, particularly through the coming weeks as we go through the next stage of our fight against Omicron. Our hope is that this will help to address and reduce the staffing challenges in schools due to isolation protocols, reduce the number of operational days that schools require. That's the departmental code for a day when schools are shut for learning because we're having preparation, the operational days, and keep students in our classrooms to the greatest extent possible. I know that the first half of this year has not been easy for families, for students, and for school staff. Nearly 2/3 of our schools were impacted with COVID cases before Christmas, with 900 cases confirmed in student, staff, and those connected to our school system. Even with most students learning from home since the end of the winter break, we've continued to have high case numbers reported, including self-reports to schools by families, sometimes upwards of 100 cases per day, underlining the threat that Omicron, despite it being a milder variant of the disease, continues to pose because of the sheer volume of infections, the threat that it poses to our hospital system. Alors, je sais que l'apprentissage à distance pose des défis pour plusieurs familles. Cependant, ces quelques semaines d'apprentissage à distance ont également permis au personnel scolaire de disposer de plus de temps pour recevoir ces vaccins de rappel, car il s'agit d'un groupe prioritaire depuis quelques mois. Elles ont également permis de donner plus d'occasions aux élèves de 5 à 12 ans de recevoir leur première et même leur deuxième dose du vaccin. Compte tenu de certains changements provinciaux plus importants en matière de recherche et de tests et contacts, le programme de tests rapides pour soutenir la recherche des contacts étroits dans les écoles ne sera plus disponible pour le moment. A limited supply of rapid tests were made available for symptomatic children in the 2 to 5 age bracket through early learning and childcare facilities on a first-come, first-served basis. But students from kindergarten through to grade 12 who have one symptom should still register for rapid tests online, and if there are any changes to that, public health will let everybody know. Our intention was to be able to support our youngest learners who are still ineligible to be vaccinated, and that sector has additional support through the last few weeks. Families will be responsible for notifying the school if their child is positive with COVID-19, as part of notifying all their own close contacts per the directives from public health. School districts will also continue to notify school communities when cases are reported to them, but this may look a little bit different than the situation folks have become used to over the last number of months. For instance, some districts are developing a web page where families can get up-to-date information on which schools have had cases reported to them. We are working to ensure more stability for families and students when cases are reported so that they can continue learning in person to the greatest extent possible, but we will ask families to be vigilant and to continue to monitor for symptoms. So if you have any new or worsening symptoms, whether you're a child looking at being back in school next week, hopefully, or an adult, it's more important than ever that you stay home and get tested. The department's going to continue to report information that we receive from schools and districts on these self-reported cases. And I know that questions around testing are always something that, for good reasons, attract a lot of attention and interest, and be happy to answer further questions on that as we get into the question and answer session later. Next. As has been discussed quite a bit over the last number of weeks and the last couple of months, a working group on ventilation systems in schools was established during the pandemic's early stages. And that included representatives from WorkSafe, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, Health, and the staff at Education and Early Childhood Development. Before Christmas, Education and Early Childhood Development commissioned a separate report from an independent science and research company. And we commissioned this report to look into government's ongoing work to improve ventilations in schools, which includes, based on that previous report, over $10 million invested towards air quality testing in schools and upgrading ventilation systems. And we have 11 projects currently underway, a number only limited by the accessibility of specialized contractors required to do that work. But what I'm going to tell you today, I'm going to be focusing in on HEPA filters, because these have been broadly discussed in other jurisdictions and here in New Brunswick as well. So I'd like to get into the conclusions from the report that we commissioned before Christmas. Comme vous le savez tous, le coronavirus continue à évoluer depuis ces dernières 2 années. On voit que l'utilisation des filtres HEPA dans les systèmes de ventilation intégrés, lorsque cela est possible, pouvait présenter certains avantages. Mais notre équipe était inquiétée depuis longtemps des risques liés à l'utilisation des appareils HEPA portables dans les salles de classe. HEPA filters, while they can filter out particles, also operate similarly to fans, create air currents in a classroom. Fairly self-evident. The concern we heard from governmental experts was that more COVID particles could therefore be circulated in classrooms. And that would potentially be due to infected individuals exhaling aerosols. They would reach other students and staff before they had the chance to pass through the air filtration device. Cependant, nous avons accès à de plus en plus de nouvelles recherches. Nous en apprenons davantage sur les mesures préventives que nous pouvons raisonnablement adopter. Durant les derniers mois, j'ai participé à des débats plus engagés sur la question et j'ai entendu des opinions et commentaires divers et variés des membres du public et aussi des experts. Nous avons entendu plusieurs points de vue et de plus en plus de recherches sur cette question ont été communiquées publiquement et envoyées directement au personnel. À la lumière de ces débats et discussions, une évidence s'impose. Il y a de plus en plus de renseignements et de recherches contradictoires sur les effets des systèmes HEPA portables dans les salles de classe. The point of the report was to conduct a review of up-to-date scientific literature to answer 4 questions. Those questions centered around 1. Would installing portable HEPA filtration units have a positive, negative, or no effect in classrooms without integrated ventilation? Is the response to question 1 different for schools with integrated ventilation systems? 3, what kind of analysis has been done in other jurisdictions on the impact these units have in classrooms and what were the results? 4, how can we measure the impact of these machines? Should they be installed in classrooms and how do they need to be set up to work safely, efficiently, and properly if installed? So I want to thank RPC Science and Engineering for their thorough work on this report. While the complete reports are both the original one on overall school ventilation and this one on HEPA filtration are both available online, the review acknowledged was along the same lines as what our staff and the provincial working group has said. Measures like masking, physical distancing, and not coming to school when sick are the most important practical things that we can do. Les écoles publiques qui ont des systèmes de ventilation mécanique intégrés devraient continuer à utiliser les systèmes déjà en place conformément aux directives de la ASPC. Même si le rapport ne relève aucune preuve démontrant directement que la filtration HEPA réduit la transmission de COVID-19 dans les salles de classe, le rapport indique que la recherche indique la possibilité de réduire la présence de la COVID-19 dans l'air lorsqu'ils sont utilisés en conjonction avec le masquage. So while the report, which reviewed all the current scientific evidence, shows no evidence directly proving that HEPA filtration reduces COVID-19 transmission in classroom, the report indicated that more research was available on those units, which led to a change, for example, Public Health Canada, who last year recommended against their use, then switching to say it could be looked at as another layer of protection. And our report found that when they are properly installed, operated, and maintained, they can serve as an additional line of defense to support a reduction in the propagation of airborne COVID particles in classrooms without mechanical ventilation systems, as long as they are coupled with masking. So given the rapid spread and transmissibility of Omicron, we know we need to use every single available tool so that we can help reduce transmissions. Le personnel du ministère et du ministère des Transports et de l'Infrastructure a travaillé rapidement pour donner suite à ces recommandations. Nous avons investi à environ 3 millions de dollars pour acheter 2000 unités et les installer dans les 60 écoles sans ventilation mécanique intégrée. I want to note the importance of the proper installation of these units, because adequate placement and operation are essential to ensuring that they present a benefit and no risk. Training is being provided to those responsible for placing units in classrooms, and once placed, they should not be moved. The report did note concerns for risks associated with the potential misoperation of these portable units, which align with our concerns about using fans in classrooms. Les 2000 systèmes sont déjà en voie d'être livrés et installés dans les 60 écoles sans ventilation mécanique. Et nous devrions pouvoir installer l'ensemble des systèmes d'ici le 31 janvier, date à laquelle nous attendons le retour des élèves en classe pour l'apprentissage en personne. Bien que nous soyons en bonne voie pour installer tous les systèmes d'ici le 31, si l'installation est prolongée pendant la semaine prochaine, cela n'empêchera pas des élèves de retourner en classe si la santé publique nous permet de reprendre l'apprentissage en personne. So I want to thank all the folks who engage with me online about HEPA filters, experts and members of the public, because through raising those concerns, it encouraged a dialogue inside the department that led to the decision that I made and the announcement that I'm making today. So this shows that our system can work when citizens and politicians and experts work together, and shows the importance of maintaining our governance and other institutions despite their fragility, which is becoming all too apparent as we see the headlines from around the world these days. And so in the meantime, as usual, I'm going to ask for everyone's collaboration in following the health and safety measures in the schools. Because despite all of our planning and precautions, there are going to be more cases in schools. We have seen with the infectivity of Omicron that it's a question of controlling the spread, not stopping it, and our schools will not be immune. But similarly, we recognize the importance of a return to face-to-face education for our students. And so, as we have so often throughout the pandemic, we'll be asking public health for their final recommendation and look forward to implementing whatever directives they give us. And so we can let our teachers and staff get back to their critical work of catching up from the losses due to COVID and preparing for the next year as we continue to battle through this disease and continue to work to make sure that our students receive the highest quality education despite the restrictions that COVID is imposing on all of us. So we're going to need the help from everyone, from businesses, families, folks in the system, people who work for nonprofits. Every single New Brunswicker is part of this fight, because in the end, transmission in communities is what drives transmission in schools. So schools are part of our society, and we have to recognize them as such. And while we continue to put extraordinary measures inside schools and to have them operate a little bit as a mini society within our province, in the end, the students and the staff go home to their families. They go out in the community. So please, every single moment you go out, think about the impact that your decisions are making on our ability to keep schools open for face-to-face learning and to protect our students and our staff. Et même, une fois que nous aurons surmonté cette période de la phase 3, je demande à chacun de continuer à suivre les principes que nous connaissons qui aident à réduire la propagation du virus. Se faire vacciner, limiter nos contacts, la porte des masques, la distanciation physique, se laver les mains. Et s'il vous plaît, si vous avez même un symptôme, ne veuillez pas venir à l'école, reste à la maison et se faire tester. So, we're looking forward to welcoming our students back into the classroom as soon as we safely can under the guidance of public health. But again, we need the help of everyone to get there. So please, let's work together so we can get our students safely back to class next Monday and carry on with the next stage of our fight against this virus. Thank you so much, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. We'll now proceed with questions from the media. Each reporter will have one question and one quick follow-up. You have the right to pose your question in the language of your choice. Nous allons maintenant procéder aux questions des journalistes. Vous avez le droit de poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. Chaque journaliste aura une question et un suivi. Pascal Reichenauge, Radio-Canada, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour, Monsieur le ministre. J'aimerais savoir, pouvez-vous nous expliquer en français qu'est-ce qui va se produire lorsqu'il y a un ou plusieurs cas confirmés au sein de la communauté scolaire, que ce soit des élèves, du personnel, des enseignants? Comment vous allez gérer ça au cours des prochaines semaines, des prochains mois?
Juste pour préciser, alors, la manière qu'on va, s'il y a quelqu'un qui pense qu'ils ont un symptôme, pense qu'ils sont infectés, ou est-ce qu'ils ont déjà confirmé qu'il y a un cas?
Cas confirmé. Donc, lorsqu'un parent avise l'école, mon enfant a la COVID, ou lorsqu'un enseignant a la COVID, comment vous allez gérer ça avec les ouvertures, les fermetures, tout ça?
OK. Alors, en ce cas encore, c'est juste pour préciser en grand, dès que le commencement, si tu penses que tu es malade, tu as un symptôme qui change ou devient plus sévère, reste à la maison, assure que tu peux prendre accès à un test. Aussi, s'il y a un membre du communauté famille, par exemple un parent, maintenant, on demande à tout le monde, si tu es confirmé d'avoir COVID, assure que tu donnes cette information aux santé publique pour assurer qu'on a cette information et on peut avoir une photo, même si c'est imprécis, de la situation avec le virus partout dans la province. Après ça, on va continuer de partager l'information, mais ça va être basé sur les sites web dans chaque district, des différents mécanismes dans chaque district pour partager l'information avec la communauté scolaire. Et Robert, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses qui a manqué dans ça? Je pense que ça, c'est tout.
Bonne réponse.
OK. Alors, j'espère que c'était assez complet. Merci.
Oui, juste ma question de suivi, si vous pouvez m'expliquer comment ça va fonctionner si, par exemple, il y a un cas ou plusieurs cas confirmés. Est-ce que vous allez fermer seulement une classe, fermer toute l'école au complet? Comment ça va marcher?
Ça va être le même que la dernière semaine avant Noël, où on demande aux santé publiques, ils vont nous donner un avis. OK, on pense que ça fait de bon sens d'avoir une journée opérationnelle, de fermer pour 1 jour, 2 jours, 3 jours, et on va faire la même chose. Avec Omicron, on essaie d'avoir une approche beaucoup plus ciblée sur les éclosions, sur les cas qu'on peut voir sont en train de grandir en nombre dans une communauté, dans une école. Alors ça, c'est enfin une décision pour santé publique en collaboration étroite avec le ministère de l'Éducation.
Merci.
Merci, Pascal. Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Kevin Bissett, Canadian Press.
Yes, good afternoon. When schools do resume, we do expect there will be cases. Have you done modeling and any estimates as far as the number of cases you do expect?
I would not be able to give you that. I think if there's one thing that COVID-19 has done to humble people in positions of authority around the world over the last 2 years is to teach us all not to make predictions. The only prediction I'm going to make is we're going to have cases. We're going to have schools that do move online from periods of time. We will have operational impacts, and we will have to deal with them. That's just with Omicron. Whatever comes next after that might change the game again. We've had a brand new disease and 3 major variants of it in less than 2 years. So any predictions I make now would probably be unwise on that front. But we will continue to do our best and continue to be guided by the science.
And just a quick question in regards to the HEPA filters. How many of the units have been put in, and what kind of cost are we looking at?
The cost is about $3 million, and most of the units we expect to have in the next couple of days, and we're hoping to have all of them in before the 31st. But again, if there are any holdovers, we will get those in the first couple of days of next week, because part of the point here is that we're not just, although they are simple devices, the report that we commissioned did show the importance of their proper location in any given classroom. So they're going to be installed by people who have expertise in that area. So if that takes them an extra couple of days, we'll give them that time to get that job done properly.
So the last report that I got actually was this morning, and it said that we should be complete the Thursday prior, which would be the, 27th or 28th? And that's great because it would give us, living in the Northeast here, it would give us a snow day if there is one. So I expect to have them all installed if indeed there is a return to class January 31st.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Penny. Vicky Hogar, CHCO-TV, your first question, please.
Thank you. Minister Cardy, you said transmission in communities is what drives transmission in schools. 400 people gathered in Fredericton for a protest against COVID measures on Saturday. 2 men were arrested. Tickets were handed out. But do you think enough was done to prevent non-compliance to the Emergency Measures Act, especially considering that there seem to be more rallies scheduled for this coming weekend?
Yeah, I think my position on those folks and their actions are crystal clear, and I really want to restrict this briefing to discussion specifically around the school system, but I'm sure we'll have lots of opportunities to talk about anti-vaxxers in the weeks and months to come, unfortunately.
My follow-up is 3 people under age 20 are currently in hospital with COVID-19, while the 12 to 19 age group has about 81% fully vaccinated. Only about 54.3% of the 5 to 11-year-old age group has had at least one dose of a vaccine, even though they've been eligible for nearly 2 months. What are your plans to increase vaccines in this age groups, and in a matter of time, should certain activities for this age group require vaccines?
So I think also my position on making sure that our students are vaccinated are also extremely clear, and I think it should be a requirement from my perspective. And I know that's something that was not agreed to by the legislature of New Brunswick 2 years ago, but continue to believe that's one of the most effective ways to keep our schools safe, not just from COVID, from the other diseases that we can't forget still exist out there and pose a risk. But in the end, we have done every single thing we can to offer. We have offered clinics at RHA offices, we've offered them in communities, we've offered them at drugstores, we've offered them in schools. The in-school clinics that we offered had fairly limited pickup, but we are going to continue to take advice from public health on how best to increase that total number so that we can make sure that as many of the student population as possible get vaccinated. But while we wait for that and work on new ways to do that, it comes back again to the community. If you're an adult, got 91.7% with first dose, 83.8 have had their second dose, and 38.7 have had their third dose. Please go and get your shot. It's a small gesture, a gesture that protects you, the folks around you, and the province, and our school system in this case, and our hospital system, which is why we're in this difficult level 3 period right now. So that's, health will provide more details on additional campaigns they may have. My plea is simply to get this done, and for those of us outside of the school system to play our part as well. And there's still a whole lot of people who could step up that tiny bit more.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Vicki. John Chillibeck, Brunswick News, your first question.
You've mentioned on social media that there were threats made against you this weekend, and I'm assuming that some of it has to do with your stance on, ensuring that children are vaccinated as well. There's been a surge in anger over the, not just here, elsewhere as well, with children needing vaccines. There's this view out there that, these kids shouldn't get it among some people. So I wanted you to describe that in more detail, these threats you've mentioned, and how common has that become among your cabinet and your government, these threats that they're getting?
So thanks for that. And yes, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the origin. And I know that Minister Shepherd had a story out a few weeks ago on this issue. But again, this is a technical briefing around back to school plans. There'll be lots of opportunities for us to talk about anti-vaxxers and why they do the strange things that they do on other occasions. But today I really want to focus in on all the parents who are watching, who are concerned, teachers who are watching, and students about what the plans are for back to school, hopefully on the 31st, and what they can expect from those classroom environments. Anti-vaxxers are absolutely part of our community for, I was going to say for better or for worse, but for worse. And we have to figure out how to work with them or around them or something, but let's come back to that on a day when I'm not going through some of these detailed answers that I think parents are watching to find the answers to. Sorry for not being able to answer more directly.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. And just for a follow-up, if you look at the statistics, it's just a little over half of kids under 12 have had their first vaccination dose. So given that high number and this surge we just talked about of anti-vaccine sentiment, just thinking of what happened in Fredericton a few weeks ago, I think there were 30 protesters at a rally at City Hall, and this weekend it was 400. How concerned are you that as this goes on, restrictions and such, that future demonstrations will be bigger?
Well, that's obviously something I've been concerned about for a long time, and prior to COVID, the impact of people who are questioning science and institutions, ultimately governance systems, and our entire way of life. But again, that's going to be something I'd be happy to come back to, but outside of this technical briefing. I think that today really want to focus on what's happening in the schools and how parents can best prepare and how make sure teachers have a clear understanding of what's going to be happening. There's all sorts of challenges outside the school system, which I'd be happy to address at another point.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, John. Natalie Sturgeon, Global News. Your first question, please.
Hi, Minister. I'm just wondering if you can just clarify to me what the science in this report actually says. Does it support the use of HEPA filters? And if it said that it didn't really stop the spread of COVID, why are we putting them in schools now?
So to be clear on the purpose of this report was not to go and do independent research, but to do a proper literature review of the evidence that's out there, which has been changing quickly. And it showed that there was benefits to HEPA filters if properly placed in classrooms, more limited than some of the people who are really enthusiastic about their use, but definitely there. And that's something which I think the body of expert opinion has, some folks have been arguing for them for a while, others slower to come to this, to the HEPA party. And Health Canada being one of them, who we were largely following guidance from, who changed their advice shortly before Christmas, after this report was commissioned, to say that they believe they were a stronger tool than they had previously said. Mr. Penny, do you have anything you'd want to add on that?
Yeah, I would add, I'll give you a little bit of background, and both the current Public Health Canada guidelines, which are online, and this report say essentially the same thing. So in New Brunswick, we've got 294 schools total. We've got 234 schools that have mechanical HVAC systems. Early on, we instructed and resourced school districts that the mechanical HVAC systems in place should be fitted with the maximum amount of filtration available to that unit. And the units are, think of driving your car at home. The units are all slightly different so that fit the size of the school, but there is a documented maximum filtration available. That's what both Public Health Canada and this report say is optimal, which is bringing in fresh air all the time, filtering the air that's recirculated, and expelling a certain amount of air. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and the formula that I think everybody has looked at the last couple of years, is what's the risk versus what's the benefit? And a year ago, we would have said, I have inquiétude, as we'd say in French. I've got a little bit of anxiety about pushing air around the room, not being able to know exactly where it's going or whether it's got virus laden or not. So there's a risk. And I'm really unclear on the benefit. So why would I do this? A year later, and RPC did some excellent work for us in saying, yeah, there's a risk there, but here's how you manage it. So that's super. I can reduce my risk now. And what the science is saying is we don't, and I'll be quite frank with you, we don't have studies specific to COVID, but we do have studies documenting that particulate matter, microbial particulates, can be taken out of the air effectively by these devices in closed settings. So what that did is it effectively tipped the formula. It said, okay, there's probably some benefit here, although I don't know how much, and I can manage my risk. So I can reduce my risk and increase my benefit, and therefore now I want to do it.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Penny. Natalie, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I heard the $3 million cost, but I'm just wondering if you could give me the numbers of schools who will actually get HEPA filters.
Yeah, in the study that came out last year, because I had some other folks asking me about, well, why do we need to do a study on what our ventilation systems were? Because we actually didn't have a central document looking at the ventilation system in schools until Mr. Penny and his team went off and made sure that work was done. And now we know both issues in individual classrooms, individual schools, but one of the central and most obvious things that we found out was 60 schools don't have integrated mechanical ventilation systems. So those that do have filtration systems built in, which obviously makes sense. For those 60 schools that don't, that's where the portable units are going, in recognition of the fact they don't have any other form of mechanical ventilation. So they will be going into those schools, again, in specific places. And again, my plea to anyone who'll be in those classrooms, please don't move them.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Natalie. Maria Isabelle Noël, Radio-Canada, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez? Bonjour, vous m'entendez? Oui, bonjour. OK. Oui, bonjour, excusez-moi, cette question est pour le ministre Cardy. Si vous pouvez me répondre en français, s'il vous plaît. C'est par rapport à la manifestation qui a eu lieu samedi dernier. Alors, les autorités, la police étaient au courant qu'elle allait avoir lieu et rien n'a été fait pour l'empêcher. Selon vous, comment aurait dû être gérée la situation par la police de Fredericton?
La question, comme j'ai mentionné en anglais quelques minutes passées, ceci est vraiment un brassage technique sur les questions autour de le retour à l'école. J'espère que ça va être le lundi prochain. Et sur mes paroles sur les questions, qu'est-ce qui est arrivé en Fredericton cette fin de semaine, je pense que mes paroles sur les réseaux sociaux étaient assez claires. Et je continue de penser la même chose. Et on va voir, je suis sûr et certain, malgré le fait que ça c'est un peu inquiétant, beaucoup d'opportunités dans les semaines, les mois qui arrivent de discuter les gens anti-vax et les raisons pourquoi il fait les choses qu'il fait et la manière qu'on agisse envers eux autres en notre effort contre COVID. Alors, je m'excuse de ne pas vous donner une réponse plus compréhensive aujourd'hui, mais je veux vraiment cibler pour les parents, les membres de l'équipe scolaire qui sont en train de regarder cette émission aujourd'hui, de répondre aux questions spécifiques autour de la retour de l'école. Mais merci pour les questions.
J'ai une autre question, vraiment désolée d'insister, mais par rapport à l'arrêté ministériel d'urgence, est-ce que vous pensez qu'il gagnerait à être plus clair au sujet des rassemblements publics?
Encore, je pense que mes paroles sur cette question sont absolument claires et je continue de penser exactement la même chose.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci, Maria-Isabelle. Adam Harris, Brunswick News, your first question, please.
Thank you. Minister, on the 60 that will receive the HEPA filters, you said 11 currently have projects underway to give them full ventilation systems. I wanted to know if you have a timeline for them and then a timeline for the remainder of the 49 with nothing. I know you said it's a matter of labor, but do you have any idea when these projects will be completed?
Well, that's why I'm fortunate that ADM Penny is here, because that is exactly his day job, every minute of every day working on those projects. So over to you, Robert.
So we will do 8 or so of those projects a year for the next 4 years, which obviously would be 32. We would also predict that of the 60 schools in question, some of those would be rotated out and replaced, so replaced by a new school rather than replacing the ventilation system. So the majority of those would either be rotated out or have a replacement system in 4 or 5 years from now. I'll reiterate what the minister said. We do, our capital budget this year is 70 million plus. The amount of ventilation work that we could get done in a given year, we would do a few more projects if we could. If we find that there is capacity out there to do more, then we can rethink that in a future year. But right now, I think we're up against the limit of available work to be done.
Cool.
Thank you.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that's maybe first, Dominic, is that acceptable 4 or 5 years? I mean, this is a problem that needs addressing now, but I wanted my second question to be about hopefully January 31st for start date. If the province remains in level 3, does that mean schools will not open, or is there a possibility where level 3 could stay in place but schools are still on the table?
I'll hop in on that first part, and that is one of the benefits both to the taxpayer and to the citizen of this HEPA project is that the HEPA filters don't just address COVID. The HEPA filters will help us improve air quality in those buildings that don't have mechanical HVAC going forward. So even if, magic happened and COVID went away this summer, I won't say all, but many of those HEPA units would stay in place and would remain in place until mechanical HVAC made them redundant or something like that. So the nice thing about this project is $3 million, but $3 million well spent, because it does improve the air quality in instances where we don't have mechanical HVAC. So,
and so to add on to that, as Mr. Penny was saying, we've got at the moment 60 schools without mechanical ventilation systems. They will have HEPA filters as another layer of protection. We've got as many projects as we have ongoing, again, based on just the labor market. One of the reasons why we've been putting a real focus on trades in schools and having more opportunities for students to be able to learn trades both during school and preparing them for going to get their certification afterwards. And so I would love it to be done faster. It's purely a question of human resources. So it's another area in which, as Minister Holder is often talking about, our 110 people retiring in the next 10 years and opening us up opening us up to all sorts of shortages across all sorts of specialized areas. This is another area where this has a concrete impact. On the other question around level 3 in schools, it's going to be based on what public health tells us. We moved the schools online after having put all the preparations, many of them that were announced before Christmas, in place with bubbles and so on, and the masks and other issues. And we moved online because public health were loud and clear, and the Department of Health as well, that we were facing a really difficult situation with our hospitals. And I've heard people saying, oh, well, why couldn't you fix the hospitals? I said, well, we had a year or so in government before COVID-19 hit, and are certainly doing our best to work on health reform. And I know we've got some exciting announcements around different aspects of health reform coming up. But we have that limited capacity. And when public health said that schools being open, as much as we know that's desirable from a mental health point of view and all the other reasons why in-person schooling is important, but when they said that the size and number of those gatherings would likely pose a risk to our hospitals, of course we listened, and I'll continue to listen and continue to wait for the directive from public health and when to reopen. But certainly I'm optimistic that it will be next week because that was the date public health gave us. But I'm not going to prejudge their conclusions, but except to say that I know that across the province that we're hearing loud and clear the desire for students to be back in classrooms as soon as they can and with proper safety measures in place as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Penny. Thank you, Adam. Stéphane Cloutier, CIMS-FM. Votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour, bon après-midi. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Bonjour. Oui, est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Oui.
Oui, on vous entend.
Non, on vous entend parfaitement.
Stéphane, êtes-vous là?
Peut-être on peut passer à la prochaine question
Oui,
et retourner
on va
après.
passer à la prochaine puis revenir. Eilish Boning, CTV, your first question, please.
Hi there, Minister. Are you able to hear me all right?
Perfectly.
Perfect. I do appreciate that you'd rather not speak to the weekend protests, but with things like community spread and hospitalizations playing such a large part in what will trigger a return to the classroom or not, are you disappointed that more wasn't done to try and put a stop to these protests and gatherings that you yourself have called illegal under the current emergency measures, as it could potentially impact a return?
I mean, obviously, I think my comments are pretty crystal clear in my feelings about both the rally and the potential consequences of it and all the things that were wrapped around it. But again, I really want to restrict the comments today at this briefing to technical questions around the education system, because we've got parents, staff, teachers watching. They really want to know what they're going to be facing potentially as early as next Monday, and look forward to talking about vaccines and the people who don't like them at some other point in the future.
Okay, thank you. With that in mind, how many extra teachers and staff are being hired and over what period of time?
That's a great question. So we've been aggressively looking for teachers in most parts of the province for a while. We have, in the big cities, we haven't had the same shortages, but we are going to be facing a likelihood of severe shortages of supply teachers, who we already had a fairly limited number of them available. And that's why we are going to be looking to try and take from the district, from the department, people who've got teaching credentials, trying to get them into classrooms if necessary. So we want to try and have a pool of people ready to be able to deploy if it's needed, and we'll be working with the districts and individual schools on that as we go through the next few weeks. So if a principal wakes up and sees me mopping the floor in their classroom, then that would be why.
I just wanted to come back to Adam's question for a second. I realized when I thought about it that I might have misspoke. Adam, the number of projects will vary slightly from year to year. The dollar amount is $8.75 million or so in each of the next 4 years. So I think I might have said 8 projects. That's incorrect. $8.75 million. That would be 10 or 12 projects plus or minus, obviously, in each year, depending on the size of the project. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. And if you want a list of this year's projects, we would be releasing that probably in the next week or so.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Penny, and thank you, Eilish. Jean-François Boisvert, Acadie Nouvelle, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour, M. Cardy. La situation de la COVID présentement est quand même stable depuis quelques jours. Qu'est-ce qui pourrait compromettre, par exemple, un retour en classe la semaine prochaine? Est-ce qu'on parle, par exemple, d'une hausse exponentielle des cas de COVID ou peut-être un manque de personnel, un énorme manque de personnel au niveau des écoles? Quel scénario pourrait faire en sorte qu'on recule?
Pour le retour aux formations présentielles, c'est vraiment basé sur l'avis de santé publique. Sur les questions de l'impact opérationnel créé par les absences, créées par le COVID et les autres raisons, ça c'est plutôt dans notre domaine, dans le ministère. Et on va gérer ça comme on a essayé de le gérer entre septembre et décembre et l'année passée et même l'année avant ça. Alors, aujourd'hui, la raison pourquoi les écoles ont passé la formation hybride était basée sur la recommandation de santé publique, basée sur la pression sur les hôpitaux. C'est seulement quand il dit que cette pression n'existe pas ou qu'ils sont assez confiants qu'on peut justifier un retour, c'est là qu'on va retourner à l'école pour la formation présentielle. Mais pour le reste, l'absentéisme créé par le COVID, ça va être un problème quotidien pour le reste de la pandémie, j'imagine. Et quelque chose qu'on essaie de l'adresser dans le système en utilisant les mesures que j'ai précisées, déployer les gens des districts, du ministère même, aussi d'essayer de regarder si on peut prendre connaissance des certificats des enseignants-enseignantes qui viennent de l'étranger, qui peut-être aujourd'hui sont en train de conduire les camions et les taxis. Peut-être on peut trouver une manière de les retourner à classe. Aussi, les autres manières de bouger l'équipe professionnelle d'une école à l'autre, s'il y a la pression que ça, c'est une réponse qui est demandée. Alors, on va faire tout qu'on peut pour soutenir les écoles, mais aussi soutenir une éducation dans les écoles. Parce que on ne peut pas oublier, fin de compte, que ça, c'est la raison qu'on a un système d'éducation publique pour offrir une éducation de haute qualité. Alors, ce n'est pas seulement d'avoir un immeuble qui est ouvert, c'est un immeuble qui offre l'éducation. Alors, on va faire tout qu'on peut pour préserver ces deux buts parallèles, assurer au maximum la santé et assurer au maximum la qualité de l'éducation.
D'accord. Beaucoup de retards ont été cependant accumulés au cours des derniers mois. À ce stade-ci, est-ce qu'on considère certaines mesures peut-être comme annuler la semaine de relâche, par exemple?
On regarde toutes les mesures qui sont présentées. Et chaque jour, j'entends des experts, des membres du public, les idées pour qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour adresser le problème de rattrapage. Je veux dire, franchement, en mars, c'est fortement probable qu'on va être encore en train de gérer Omicron. J'espère que ça va passer le point maximal de cet épisode de la pandémie, mais en même temps, c'est clair que ça ne va pas disparaître. Et alors, en mars, si on peut réussir que les écoles sont ouvertes entre le janvier 31 et le congé de mars, ça serait super. Je ne veux pas du tout inquiéter les parents, les étudiants et les équipes scolaires aujourd'hui par dire que le congé de mars est au risque, mais on va absolument regarder les autres mesures qui sont nécessaires, les activités pendant l'été, les autres mesures, mais on a besoin d'attendre pour voir qu'est-ce que ça va être la situation actuelle. Si nous sommes encore en train de gérer une autre variant, une autre éclosion, c'est clair qu'on peut toujours changer les choses. Alors, entre ici et aujourd'hui, on a beaucoup de journées à passer avant ça.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci, Jean-François. Laura Brown, CTV, your first question, please.
Hi, Minister. There are some school staff who've messaged me saying that they have yet to access an N95 mask. Now, I understand you had said that this is up to the districts, but are you confident that they have enough? Will they be giving them to educational assistants, school bus drivers, janitorial staff? And will there be extras for students that potentially do not have a good enough mask? Like, how will you police that? Schools will.
So on the first question, you're right about the districts. So they've all gone out. There are sufficient numbers. They are for all professional staff. For students, just like with anything else that teachers often put aside, we expect there to be a number for kids who perhaps come from families where the parents just haven't or have refused to provide a mask. But we're emphasizing that that is just like you would get your child dressed in the morning, that providing them with a good quality mask is also part of getting them ready for school.
And you're probably going to say that this is a public health question, but I am wondering, boosters, there's some parents that are concerned that their child between 12 and 17 have yet to be able to access their booster. And it's kind of coinciding with school return. They'd like them to have it before they return to school. Wondering if you are aware of a timeline as to when boosters will be available for that age group.
That's a question for public health. Sorry, I'm just.
Would you like to see it soon?
But it's obviously, as soon as we can get everyone vaccinated with their third shot, the better. But we have limitations based on the number of people able to administer the vaccines and, of course, in vaccine supply. So making the big issue has been the human resource side. So as soon as we can, absolutely in line, though, with the guidance as well around the spacing of doses, because the last thing we want is to contribute to any sort of reduction in the efficacy of the vaccines. Yeah, we want to make sure that every shot that's given out is going to have the maximum effect in protecting the individual involved and then the folks around them too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Laura. Aidan Cox, CBC, your first question, please.
Good afternoon.
Aidan, I can hear you, but you're quiet.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Good afternoon. When will we know for sure whether students are going back to in-person learning on January 31st? And I mean, when's the latest date that parents might be notified by? And part of that question, I guess from what you said, it seemed as if you alluded to the possibility that we could still be in level 3, but schools will still be reopened. Is there sort of a specific benchmark for when or for when schools can reopen?
Again, that is, we moved schools online based on a recommendation from public health, and we will open them based on a recommendation from public health. So I can't say it more simply and clearly than that. And in terms of when, that will obviously be as soon as possible. There's the way this process works is recommendations are brought to cabinet and then they are made public after cabinet's had a chance to say yay or nay. So certainly expect that in the very near future. But at the same time, we want to make sure as well, given that we're talking about next Monday, we give as much notice as possible. So expect that in the next couple of days.
Okay. Has there been a minimum standard set for safety staff in schools, which if not achieved triggers an operational school closure for health and safety reasons? And what is that minimum?
Again, that's a question for public health, working with education, absolutely. But what we've been doing, so a couple of ways to approach that. First, from the education side, if we don't have the staff, then we have to move to an operational day until we have sufficient staff. But in terms of controlling COVID, because we often have absences caused by other reasons, but in terms of any COVID-specific issues, public health would again work with us on their recommendation for how long a school would move online and work with the school team and the districts and so on.
So I guess in terms of like a minimum for staffing, does that kind of go based on the specific school, or is there like a percentage factor that is in play?
Yeah, it's based on it's absolutely based on each individual school situation. So that differ from school to school, both in terms of the absences for COVID or non-COVID reasons, and then again, in terms of public health side that they have made last year, we had recommendations in some cases for a single day, in some cases for 3 days, and in some cases a couple of weeks. And so we would absolutely continue in the same direction to look to them to tell us the appropriate amount of time for school to either be closed if it's a single operational day or to move online if that's necessary.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Aidan. Marie Sutherland, CBC, your first question, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Minister Cardy, some schools, some boards or districts in other provinces, Ontario, for example, have asked that provincial testing and assessments be paused for the 2021-2022 school year because it would put too much stress on kids who are obviously already stressed out. Is New Brunswick planning to do this this year, or will it be proceeding with the full provincial assessment tests and national PCAP tests?
So with some of the in-school exams that were scheduled for around this time, we had obviously delayed those and made adjustments which have already been communicated. For those other issues, we'll have more to share on that in the next little while. Again, part of the problem we have is anything that looks further ahead than a few weeks, we do not know what the virus is going to throw at us. And as much as I wish that we had someone in government who was all-seeing and could tell us what was going to happen, we are looking at the evidence, looking at the data, teams of people doing that and doing their very best to stay on top of this. But I can say that our goal continues to be to try as much as we can to make sure that we can meet the benchmarks that are there in the system. But if we can't, and we've done this in previous years, we'll absolutely make accommodations. And the only thing I could say to parents who, on hearing that, I'm sure would be concerned, possibly some parents concerned about the possibility of exams going ahead, others concerned about the possibility of them being canceled, is that there's a team of people who are doing their very best to balance all of these questions, and we'll continue to do that. And please continue to reach out with your thoughts on how we can do better. But in the end, this is a volatile, ever-changing situation, and we're doing the best we can with the information we can get. And we do want to try and preserve those benchmarks. At the same time, as you said, there's other jurisdictions where they've been looking at making changes. But we are in a context where every single education system in the entire world is going through some version of what we are going through. Because the concerns I really, especially from grade 12, the parents especially of grade 12 students, a good number of grade 12 students themselves, is around what impact this is going to have on their lives, on going to community college or to university, or to even starting on the job market with a good high school transcript. And we've seen excellent cooperation from the community colleges and universities. They recognize that they have to be flexible. They're all enduring this pandemic the same way as we are. So at least on that front, the only sort of reassurance I can really give is that we are literally, as a planet, all in this together, and we are all trying to figure out the best path. And I continue to look, so does the team, at what other provinces and other countries are doing and trying to take what seems like it looks like it's going to work, or ideally if there's any evidence base. But even there, 2 years into a pandemic is not a long time to build up a good data set. So often we are trying to look to pick up the best pieces of policy advice we can as the situation changes week to week to week.
Thank you, Minister. Marie, do you have a follow-up?
I do. So speaking of that data set, what do the latest assessment results look like? I guess that would be 2021. And what do they tell us about how well students have been learning during these past 2 years?
We've got some good details on that, but what I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind, can we follow up with that offline? Just because it gets into a level of technical complexity that I'm almost certain to make a mistake with at least a decimal and then just have to correct it later. So if you wouldn't mind, we can just follow up with that after the press conference.
Okay.
Thanks.
Stéphane Cloutier, CEMS-FM.
That concludes today's education update with Education Minister Dominic Cardy. Just to give you a quick recap, well, not actually a recap, the numbers have come in for the day in terms of COVID-19. So there are 1,040 new cases in the province today, 469 healthcare workers. I think that is the most that have been isolating at this time. And 3 more New Brunswickers have died. There are 131 people in New Brunswick hospitalized with COVID-19. 12 of those cases are in the ICU with 4 on ventilators. So there is a bit of a jump up in numbers, but I think a decrease in terms of the number of ventilators. Interesting conference. I know a lot of us asked about the protests this weekend, and I understand that he did want to keep the questions related to technical. Unfortunately, if he chooses not to answer, we didn't get a question to replace that question, so I did have more questions to ask, and unfortunately wasn't able to ask it. But again, he did say that transmission in the community is directly linked to transmission in schools and leads to, so you would think that those questions would be appropriate for those conferences, but oh well. Thank you for joining me today. I will post online on Facebook next time there is a COVID-19 update. We should expect one, I would say, by the end of this week, given that lockdown measures are scheduled to end this coming Sunday at midnight. So next Monday, this time next week, we are supposed to be leaving level 3. So likely there will be an update, probably with Dr. Russell and Premier Higgs later in the week. Just follow us on Facebook and I'll keep you updated there as to what is happening and when. And please feel free to use the email address below my name on the screen right now, news@chco.tv, if you want to submit any questions or concerns for consideration for upcoming conferences. I will see you next time. I'm Vicki Hogarth at the CHCO News Desk.
This has been a news and public affairs production of CHCO-TV, New Brunswick's only source for independent community television.